A popular children's video creator is facing backlash over a social media video she shared celebrating Pride Month. Rachel Accurso, an educational content creator, posted a video on her TikTok account, Miss Rachel for Littles. She wished her followers a happy Pride on the first day of Pride Month.
Happy Pride to all of our wonderful families and friends. This month and every month I celebrate you. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're exactly who you are. To those who are going to comment they can't watch the show anymore because of the support, no worries and much love your way. God bless. I am not chasing fame or views. I'm standing strong in love.
This comes as a comment Accurso posted on transgender activist Dylan Mulvaney's TikTok, inviting her on the show over a year ago, has gone viral. Here's what one parent had to say.
If you still support Miss Rachel after her decision of bringing Dylan onto her show, then you are part of today's problem. Why do children have to be brought in the center of everything? Into the pride, to transgender people? Literally, frankly, it's weird how everyone just wants to include their kids in all of this stupid bullshit. It's sad that the one channel that we thought that we could rely on to be in the best interest of our kids, and now she's done this.
Bradley Buer, a conservative Christian father, wrote on X, Miss Rachel's show is for children, so young, they're just learning to talk. Sub 3 years old. Why is she pushing this and inviting the likes of Dylan Mulvaney on? It's vastly evil and inappropriate. Right-wing activist Matt Walsh also chimed in, of course. Miss Rachel is an extremely popular YouTuber who makes content for babies and toddlers. She just posted a video celebrating Pride Month. This is a message to conservative parents. She doesn't want your business. You should respond accordingly. Now, Amber, I look at that Matt Walsh tweet, and honestly, I agree. If you don't like what Miss Rachel stands for, the answer is don't watch. I totally get not wanting to have that conversation with kids prematurely. I guess I approach the issue probably differently than conservatives as someone who's a member of the LGBTQ plus community. But I think about when I'll end up having that conversation with my kids. How do I want to talk about Pride Month? Because Pride Month is something that came out of struggle. It came out of, the LGBTQ plus community fighting for their rights. I don't want to have a conversation that plants a seed in my kid's head that, there are people who believe it's wrong to be gay. Like, at what point in time is it good to have a conversation about marginalized communities and why? When do you have a conversation about slavery, about racism with your kids? For me, I know it's definitely not under 3 years old. That just doesn't feel right to me. So I can understand people not wanting to talk through this history with their kids at that age. I do think there's a group of parents who are mad about this, who just never want their kids to know that being gay is a thing, that's something they should find out when they're an adult, that being transgender is a thing, is something they should find out when they're adult. I definitely disagree with that. I don't want to make my kids this kind of, these kind of antisocial people who are not aware of entire communities and reject entire communities of people. But I can see where some parents are coming from with not wanting to have this conversation. If you don't believe in it, don't watch Miss Rachel anymore. It seems straightforward.
Yeah, and I would say the objection is not that they don't want their kids to ever know about the existence of gay people, but it's a question of age appropriateness and when they want to have that conversation, and that's a choice that should be made by the individual parent. And I think they recognize that if Miss Rachel is willing to post this video on her TikTok account, it's quite possible that this is going to make its way into the show programming. And as you said, they absolutely have the right to opt out of that. My personal opinion is that it's inappropriate, definitely, for 3-4-year-olds to be learning about sexual preferences. And I will stand by that absolutely. Now, Miss Rachel, though, has gone beyond even just saying Happy Pride Month to her followers. She has also promoted something called the Queer Fam Pride Jam, which videos have now come out on. This was also targeted towards Miss Rachel's audience of toddlers. And at this Queer Fam Pride Jam. It featured a couple of performers that were undoubtedly inappropriate for kids. There was a performer who said that they identified as a white, non-binary, trans masked human, and claimed that she realized something wasn't right with her body at the age of 2 years old, and it wasn't until 12 that a teacher exposed her to gender ideology. Then there was an individual who strutted around in a skin-tight leopard suit with cutouts around the waist and shoulders, who was doing some interesting gyrating, wearing heels, shaking his body, while collecting money from children as if he was a stripper. So the fact that Miss Rachel also advertised for this program that contained this explicit content for her young audience, I thought was incredibly inappropriate and only gives further promotion, I think, to the idea that her show should be boycotted by parents who care about the health and innocence of their children.
Yeah, I always think about these performances being labeled inappropriate. And I feel the same way about cheerleaders. It's a very limited amount of clothing. There's suggestive dancing. I know I wouldn't want my kids watching this and like seeing that it's a sexualized thing, that like, oh, we watch the boys play the sports, the women come in, they do a little dance in very limited clothing, and that's their role in this whole thing. I think the pressure we've seen on WNBA athletes shows that women in sports, women in entertainment are always treated a little bit differently. That's something we're going to have to deal with as a society. But around what women are wearing in some of the most watched historically professional sports, the dancers, the tight clothes, it doesn't feel that different to me, especially in the eyes of a child, to someone in a skin-tight leopard suit with some cutouts dancing around. And I think kids are so free about bodies. They're willing to take their clothes off at any given moment. And many kids prefer that because for them, like, being nude and not wearing a lot of clothing isn't sexual yet. So that doesn't worry me. But I do think like identifying as a trans masculine non-binary man, that's a lot of big words for Elmo. That's a lot of big words for kids to hear from adults. I think they need things in really simple terms. And if you're a parent and you want to have this conversation with your kids, it's like, if you don't believe in someone changing their gender identity from what they were assigned at birth, you just say, you're a boy, your sister's a girl. You explain it to them. But if you don't, you say, if you don't feel like your gender, you feel like you don't feel like a boy. I would just be like, that's okay. And some people love different people, just very simple terms. But I think kids confront all sorts of themes and words that don't make sense in their brains yet. There's all kinds of jokes in movies that are inappropriate, but they entirely go over kids' heads and they don't ask about them. And so I think, to some degree, parents are just worried. They don't want to make mistakes. But I think there's a little bit of over worrying that kids aren't noticing the same things we notice.
I do think we need to understand, though, that when kids are comfortable with their own nakedness, it's not appropriate for an adult to ever be naked or half dressed around them in a sexually explicit manner, because that's known as grooming. When children are exposed to that kind of behavior early on in life, they actually do internalize really harmful attitudes and behaviors related to sexuality, such as engaging in sexual acts prematurely, discovering masturbation too early, thinking that it's okay to behave that way around an adult or for an adult to behave that way with them. If you watched recently the Quiet on Set documentary that came out about Nickelodeon, there were a lot of instances where the young women on those shows were over-sexualized at the age of 10, 11, 12 years old. And it wasn't until they watched it back as adults that they realized what was happening, but it still caused lasting damage in them and the way that they viewed their relationships with other people, with adults, their ability to speak up for themselves. So, this is even outside of anything related to LGBTQ, but the inappropriate over-sexualization of children, particularly when you're sexualizing adults in front of children, is just bar none inappropriate. There's never an appropriate place for that. I don't buy the cheerleader comparison. We do know that cheerleaders are actually quite limited in the way that they're allowed to perform. We know that the costumes have certain restrictions on them. But again, if you have an issue with that and you think that it's inappropriate, then maybe you would take issue with someone who promotes the NFL, and you wouldn't want your kids to watch someone who plays Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. I think parents are having the same reaction that you might have to that to Miss Rachel, and I think they're well within their rights to do so, and I personally agree with them 100%.
Yeah, because some of the cheerleaders' moves, I mean, they are doing twerking, they're doing booty popping, they're wearing the short skirts. And it's NBA cheerleaders too. It's a lot of different kinds of dancers that show up in halftime shows. And even we've talked about on the show before the sort of toddlers and tiaras, limited clothing that dancers wear. And sometimes it's even less when the dancers are children for some reason. It just feels very weird to me that a lot of the rage is about people who are drag queens when you have people that are similarly dressed in terms of the amount of clothing and the way that they're dancing, that because it's this kind of heteronormative thing of like the cheerleaders and the football players, that it doesn't raise the same alarms. But if what the research that you described shows is that children seeing people that are sexualized, adults wearing limited clothing, doing sexualized dancing, then theoretically the seeing cheerleaders and female NBA dancers would have the same effect. And so I think I want to see it across the board, not just such a focus on members of the LGBTQ plus community from people like Matt Walsh and other commentators on the subject.
Yeah, cheerleaders are not allowed to twerk and in fact get fined for doing so. That's a pretty common part of the sport, that they are not allowed to behave in those over-sexualized ways. But I mean, I hear your point that toddlers and tiaras, the limited amount of clothing on those kids is inappropriate. We obviously agree on that. Again, I think the over-sexualization of children does not always just come from the LGBTQ community, but it does seem very odd to me that we continuously have this issue with drag queens encouraging young children to throw money at them and performing in scantily clad clothing for something that is explicitly targeted at children, right? Cheerleaders are not explicitly targeted at children. Parents sometimes make the choice to take their children to games, but this is not something that's advertised for toddlers. It's not something that parents are encouraged to bring their kids to. There's obviously other adult themes at baseball and football games, whether it's drinking or some of the rowdiness or fighting that goes on, but it's not advertised or targeted towards them. So we're just talking about two different things here. We're out of time, but we're going to be back with more Rising after this.